Hi there, I'm Vincent Bos, and I'm a life coach, relationship coach, and breakup coach. You can change the language of this podcast in the YouTube video settings. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing dumper problems after 3 months of no contact. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. Subscribe to my weekly support emails. The link is in the description. So now let's get back into today's podcast, and today we are discussing dumper problems after 3 months of no contact. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, it can be easy to assume that your ex is living an easy life. But difficulties can arise. In today's podcast, I'm discussing 3 problems that your dumper will likely face after 3 months of no contact. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is their ego isn't being rubbed. Now let me know in the comments if you believe that your ex still thinks about you. Let me know in the comments and let's see what the community thinks. And point number 1 is that their ego is no longer being rubbed. Now although every relationship and breakup is unique, what we can say in a generalized sense is that when your ex-dumper became your dumper and action the breakup, they were feeling that they were not getting enough satisfaction and fulfillment from the relationship. Now that's not to say you're a bad person, it's not to say you didn't have a great connection, but sadly, by the time the breakup was actioned, your now ex-dumper didn't feel those levels necessary to continue that connection. And hence, they would have felt in a subconscious sense, although sadly, sometimes consciously as well, that they were the A side of this relationship. Now, it's not always the case. It doesn't mean that every situation is precisely like this, but you do see dumpers believing that they are the A side of a relationship, and hence they can, quote unquote, do better. Now that again, I'm not trying to put you down, dumpies. I'm not saying this is accurate. I'm also not saying that your dumper specifically thought those things, but we have to understand that there is a very strong possibility they would have viewed themselves in that light, even if it was in a subconscious sense. So what we have here is a power imbalance. Unfortunately, in the regards of the relationship and now the breakup, they hold the cards, they hold the power, and they view themselves, even if it is just subconsciously, in that higher position. Now that means that in the back of their mind, they believe that they could get you back if they wanted to. They believe that if they needed you, they could return, because they would view you as someone who needs them. They would view you as someone who is desperate to get this relationship back. So if you, as a dumpee, do not contact your ex, there is going to come a point in time where your dumper is going to start really feeling the fact that you are no longer inflating their ego. Because when the breakup took place, I would suggest it's quite likely that you, in the position of a dumpee, would have begged, pleaded, overly reasoned to try to get this relationship to stay on track and continue. And sadly, that obviously didn't happen. Now, not only that, it's possible that post-breakup you continued that chasing. But there has come a point where you've stopped, where you've implemented my version of a no contact rule, and once we get to around 3 months or so of no contact, that is when I have found from my research that dumpers really start to feel that confusion in their mind. And that confusion is based on the concept that they don't want you in a relationship with them. They don't want you to chase them. But they've only just started realizing that they actually enjoyed the fact that you were inflating their ego. They actually enjoyed the fact that you were pushing them onto that pedestal. They actually enjoyed the fact that they felt they had this power, they felt that they were the A side actually because you was putting them in that position. And once you take your thoughts away from them, once you take your attention away, this is when they start to feel that their ego is no longer being massaged by you. And from my research, we start to see this normally around 3 months in. Now, it could be sooner in your regard, it could be later down the line in other instances, but as an average, that is what I've started to see around 3 months in. This is when dumpers are really starting to, again, they're feeling that confusion. I'm not saying at this stage they necessarily want you back. Again, from my own research, the average amount of time that a dumper will probably reach out to a dumpee is around 6 to 12 months. So 3 months is not within that average time, but it is when they first start having those thoughts. It is when they start to begin to miss what the dumpee gave them within the connection, and sometimes actually beyond and past the breakup as well. So when we consider problems that your ex-dumper is likely to face when we get to 3 months of no contact, it's important to highlight the fact that they're probably just getting to the stage of really missing their ego being rubbed. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like and hype this video. If you like my content, subscribe to the channel to keep updated. And point number 2 is delayed guilt. So today we're speaking about dumper problems after around 3 months of no contact. And one of the problems which is quite likely to hit your ex is the delayed guilt phenomenon. And this is where a dumper at around 3 months of no contact, 3 months beyond the breakup, if that's when no contact began, this is when they will really start to recognize what they have done. Now you might think, well, it's obvious what they have done. They did it. How could they not know? But a dumper will very conveniently try to almost bury themselves into hobbies, interests, different activities, whatever it might be post-breakup. Even if you find out that your ex has spent most of that time home alone post-breakup, they'd have likely been doing something to try and keep themselves distracted, because ending a relationship is not often on a whim. You know, a dumper might end a relationship suddenly if there has been a huge shock. Maybe you cheated on them and they've suddenly ended it, or something as serious as that. But a lot of the time, this would have been a fairly slow process of, sadly, romantic emotional attraction being lost. And when it hit the necessary low point, they actioned for breakup. So what this means is they've had time to process what is going on. And they know full well that they are going to be ending the relationship and sadly breaking your heart. They know this. And most of the time they don't want to do it. Most of the time, this might even make them feel sick to the fact of where they delay breaking up with you. I've spoke to dumpers who have told me that they actually wanted to end the relationship much sooner than they did, but they just couldn't bring themselves to do it. Okay? So they often know exactly what's going on and the pain it's going to cause. They don't want to hurt you, but they feel there is no other option. So this shows that they know the emotional turmoil which is going to happen, and hence they can generally try to avoid the aftermath of this by almost planning what they're going to be doing during the post-breakup period. Whether it's spending time with friends, family, activities, new things, getting back into old things, the list is endless. But what shows is that your dumper will do whatever they can to avoid considering exactly what has happened. Yes, they thought about it on the lead up, but when it took place, they don't want to face the consequences of their own actions, the consequences of guilt. Now, this is something that they can run from, but they can't hide forever. And from what I have seen, around 3 months in, This is when dumpers might start to feel those pangs of guilt. I really didn't want to do this to my dumpy. I really didn't want to hurt them. I knew this was going to happen, but I've tried to avoid the consequences by not really delving into the situation. I've not asked about my dumpy. I've not looked into what they're doing. I'm trying my hardest to not think about them. But now I can't run any further. It catches up with them. They have to look in the mirror metaphorically. Now again, generally speaking, most dumpers will not reach out to their dumpy until we are in the average amount of time of 6 to 12 months. So this is not necessarily going to be the moment that they actually reach out to you, but this delayed guilt, the guilt that technically they felt almost before they did the action, but they just didn't fully surround and wallow in it, you could say, until now. This is not necessarily going to be the moment they reach out to you. But similar to point number 1, it is a step towards that destination. So what we see here is that when a dumper does reach out to a dumpy, they've often been thinking about it almost as long as when they ended a relationship. Remember what we've been speaking of here. When someone ends a relationship, it's generally not sudden. And also, when somebody comes back into reaching out to their dumpy, again, it's often not sudden. It often starts weeks or months before. Maybe, in your instance, you will fit into this category I describe, which is around 3 months. So they're not necessarily reaching out to you, although occasionally they might, but it is those first steps, those first rungs on the ladder of where they will get to the point of where they feel they need to reach out. Now, if you would like advice and support about how to try and increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. This is the best and diamond level of support that I can provide. Go to my website www.dateme.tips for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. Talking about your feelings can also improve your mental health. It helps prevent the buildup of negative emotions, which can lead to stress, anxiety, depression, and even physical health issues. Speak your heart to free your mind. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast. If you feel that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description. And point number 3 is the world feels cold. Now, if you feel that this podcast could help others, please share it in breakup communities, groups, and servers. Let's help as many people as possible. And point number 3 is the world feels cold. So we've already described, well, when a relationship ends, your ex-dumper is likely to try and jump into activities. They're going to try and keep busy. They're also going to try and live the life that they felt they couldn't do within your connection. This is what I refer to as the single honeymoon period, and it marries up with the average amount of time that we see a dumper reaching out to a dumpy, meaning the single honeymoon period generally lasts between 6 to 12 months. This is when they will be doing their own thing to the max until what was once fresh and new feels mundane and old. They come out of the other side, and this is where it can really hit them to hopefully reach out to you, the dumpy. But what is interesting is that once again, we see a situation where this process isn't sudden. It's not as if during the whole single honeymoon period, everything is amazing 24/7 and they are not having any concerns or worries. No, once we get to around 3 months in, this is often when a dumper will just have those first moments of thinking, the world feels kind of cold. I'm not really getting that warm, cuddly feeling that I used to with my dumpy. Yes, there was problems in our relationship, but maybe I was a bit too quick to end things. because now I'm out in the big wide world, I don't have my safety blanket. I don't have my safety net. I don't have that warm, glowing feeling that I got in my relationship. Maybe your ex-dumper has dated others since you. I know it's not something you want to think about, and hopefully it didn't happen to you. But if it did, there's a strong possibility that your dumper has got a rude awakening. Remember when we said at the beginning that they viewed themselves as the A-side? Well, they're going to have a huge shock if and when they might meet someone new on a date, and they are not being pushed on that pedestal. They are not being treated like the king or the queen. In fact, they might be dumped before it was even really a relationship. Maybe the person they meet just doesn't want to see them again. And that is a real knock to their ego, which, as we've also spoke about, is the thought that you are no longer there, inflating it, and hence there doesn't seem to be anybody doing that instead of you. So this brings an overriding feeling that the world is cold. They're not having that warmth that you put into their life. Okay, there were challenges, there were problems, but hopefully they could be resolved, and hopefully you will get a chance, dumpies, with your ex-dumper in the future to try and resolve those problems and create a brand new relationship built on stronger foundations. Because when the world does feel as cold as it often does for dumpers, maybe around 3 months in to this single honeymoon period, this is when they can just start to have those few doubts in their mind. Did I make the right choice? Did I do the wrong thing? Okay, I'm just going to try and push forward and go to more events, more activities, more socializing. Sadly, occasionally more online dating. But by the time 3 months rolls on to 6, well, this is why we see it as the average amount of time that a dumper will reach out, because things for a dumper generally don't get any better.